allows that to happen for you, each of you. Got it?
Got it.
Okay. So Bob, why don't you, if you would please, read for us what appears on the back of our Still and Moving Center Almanac that we publish each year. And there's always a quote on the backside that has to do with the theme of the year. And our theme for this year of 2022, which we're just kind of coming to the completion of, is the idea of being truly human. And so, Bob, if you'd be so kind.
The title of the quote is Conscious Endeavor by Henry David Thoreau. And the quote is, "I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture, or to carve a statue, or to make a few objects beautiful, but it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we can do. To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."
Yes, thank you. So to affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. And we are Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle. We're taking up the question, what can I do without? What can I do without? And when I thought of this question and wondered what tradition, what wisdom tradition might have something to teach us on this question, I thought of the plain people who have traditionally made do without a lot of conveniences and worldly items that other people tend to take for granted. I wanted to know more about that tradition, especially since some of my recent ancestors, in fact, living family members, have belonged to that tradition. So I'm very happy to introduce my father's first cousin, Mildred Yoder, now living in Colorado. She originally came from Ohio, and our shared family members also have lived in Ohio, perhaps even in Pennsylvania or Indiana, in that general neck of the woods, where many folks from the Christian traditions or the Christian groups called the plain people live. And according to Wikipedia, these groups share in common a commitment to separation from the world by simple living, including plain dressing in unadorned clothing, and a utilitarian view of technology. Many of the plain people groups are also dedicated to pacifism, refusing to participate in war, which we heard about when we had Mary speak to us from the Quaker tradition a few months back. Some of the more well-known plain people groups include the Mennonites, which our family comes from, the Amish, the Quakers, and the Shakers. These people really helped to shape some of America's values over time with their own values of hard work, honest living, and help for others in need. Mildred has been a practicing Mennonite for her whole life, although she does not come from a conservative Mennonite church. She has short hair, as you can see, and she wears regular clothes with no head covering. And additionally, she's joining us at great effort, I have to tell you, and enormous amounts of patience from her home computer, getting it to sync up with Zoom and provide us with sound. She's graciously willing to answer some of my questions from her experience with the plain people and their beliefs. So we're just going to start out with she and I having a little conversation, and then we'll open it to the larger group. So Mildred, you and I looked over a number of verses from the Bible. And I was wondering which of these might be your favorite in terms of today's topic of what can I do without? Does any one of those particularly strike you?
Well, they were all very good. And I picked 1 Timothy 6, verse 6. That was not on the list, but godliness with contentment is great gain. And then Timothy 6, verses 17 to 19. As the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor set their hopes on the uncertainties of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasures for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. And some of the other verses, they're teaching us to share where needed.
So that's what really inspires you, it seemed to me, is that you seem to be kind of holding your own riches, quote unquote, riches or worldly goods in a loose palm. It doesn't matter how much or how little you have. It seems from what you've mentioned to me that in your tradition, people are willing to give of what they, even the little that they have. That's kind of one of the strong senses I got from you. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Can you tell us about some of those ways that people in your tradition do share?
Honesty is important, work ethic, and not trusting in ourselves, but trusting in God for our needs and sharing with those who are in need.
You were telling me about, for example, a family of which maybe a couple teenagers got into a car accident not long ago. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yes, they came from a different school district to go to school in Shira, which is a small school, small community. And on the way home, they were driving along a ditch bank. Ditches go, irrigation ditches have their paths to go through, and then there's a road that goes along there. And I think it was mostly siblings, but I think there maybe have been a couple kids that were not siblings. Anyhow, they had an accident and the driver was killed, and I'm not sure about any more. I think the others lived. Anyhow, the mother lived in, the family lived in Rocky Ford, which is about 18 miles maybe from Shira. And the people of Shira went together and visited the mother, supported her, took food, and it was not just when with the funeral and everything like that. It was after that they were supportive to her, and so that was one way. And there are a lot of Christians in that community, so it was not just one church that was helping them
out. And you've seen that kind of help to others throughout your lifetime as a Mennonite?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you tell us about some of the other sharing that you've seen and that you've participated in?
Uh, Helping out families in Ohio. There were some poor families, and if the father was working it, but he did not have consistent jobs, and so they were helped out with food and clothing, and um, they lived in a house. I'm not sure if we helped with the rent and that kind of thing, but we helped them out, and they were a family from the community. They did attend our church for a while, and there's so much in our community. If something happened to a family in the church or out, they didn't have to be part of the church to get help.
It was pretty unconditional, it sounds like.
Yes,
Yeah.
very unconditional.
Mhm. I was wondering, I'm going to ask you a little bit, I'm going to return back to that theme a little bit later, but first I wanted to ask you about this. A lot of Americans feel as if our status or our self-worth depends on what we own or the lifestyle that we can lead. And I wondered, can you tell us about some of the ways that the plain people, or at least the Mennonites, just more naturally gravitate toward a simpler life? You mentioned hard work.
Yes, yes, and not trying to keep up with the Joneses. Trusting in God and living for Him and sharing His love with others, and sharing, caring for people when they're in need is part of that.
Yeah. And this is a question that just might help in terms of us understanding some of the even more conservative groups of the Amish and Mennonites, perhaps. But nowadays, I think it's pretty common for a lot of Americans to spend their time together going to shopping malls on the weekends. And I'm imagining that's probably not what a lot of plain people do. So how would some of the plain people spend their time together on the weekends? I mean, maybe they don't even have weekends per se, except maybe the Sabbath on Sunday. I don't know how that works.
Well, mostly, and this is in Amish groups too, and conservative Mennonites, and in our home, Saturday was a day to prepare meals for Sunday as much as they could, so that we didn't have to, make salads and all those kinds of things. Preparation for that would be made ahead. My mother made a lot of Jello salads, and then the meat was put in the oven on Sunday while we were at church, and pie making, all that kind of stuff was done on Saturday, and then on Sunday we went to church, and afterwards we went home, or we might be invited to somebody else's house, or we'd invite somebody to our house, and that was when family time occurred. If we didn't have guests, it was just our family. Other times it was our family with other families, and of course, if they had children, that was wonderful. So that's the way weekends were spent. And we had church on Sunday evening too. So the afternoon was main time of just relaxing.
I see. And you told me about people's gardens, but I can't quite remember what you said about that.
Oh, especially in the Amish communities, they have huge gardens. My mother had a big garden, and things were canned. And then when we had access to freezers, why we my mother would also freeze food. In the Amish, when their children are old enough to help, the children are out there helping, and I think that occurs too in the conservative Mennonite churches. And so we grew up on a farm, and so we had access to that. I'm not sure what people in the cities did, but the Amish are very much farmers. Now they do also woodworking, making tables and chairs and buffet touches for dishes and that kind of thing. But that's pretty. It was just the way we grew up, and of course, I came at the end of the Depression, and so make doing was something you just did because of the cost of things. And then during the war, we had rations, and so there again you made do because you had to be careful how much sugar you used, so it would go for the length of time that they allotted it to you. We didn't have bananas. We had banana powder that I got too much on cereal one time and I got sick from it. So that it was really nice when we got real bananas again. And so, am I getting off track here? Anyhow, the rationing during the war affected a lot of what we had and what we did. And so our garden, if you had a big garden, you didn't go hungry because you preserved food for the winter.
And would that get shared too?
I'm sure it did, but it wasn't like in the way that we do now. It was, you just did it. You didn't advertise.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds from what you also told me that it's really steeped into Mennonite tradition to help those in need. And you told me about the Mennonite Central Committee. Yeah.
And that started in about 1920 after the First World War. And there were people in Russia, but a lot of Russian Mennonites that were in Russia migrated to the United States and Canada. And there were some still living there in what is now Ukraine. And there was a man who sent a letter to one of his relatives. And I will read what he said. Brethren, help us. We are perishing. Famine is raging more and more, and suffering is increasing daily. Yes, hourly. And so there's a group of Mennonites called Mennonite Brethren. And they and the Mennonites got together for a central committee in July of 1920 and to coordinate the response to the crisis. And over the next several years, the committee took on the name of Mennonite Central Committee, which we call MCC for short. And it provided meals, up to as many as 25,000, feeding 25,000 people at times. And they also shipped tractors and seed to them so that they could work the ground and plant seed for the future. And that's where we have what we call winter wheat, and that wheat came from that area of the seed. You plant it in the fall, and then in our area it's usually harvested about June or July. And it's a hardy kind of grain.
Mm.
And it's made into flour.
So there was a little sharing back and forth, it sounds like.
Mhm.
And do I understand that you still prepare packages or something?
Yes. The
You personally?
yes.
Okay.
There are a lot of kits that you buy the things that go into it, and it's put into a drawstring bag. And as I was looking through, there's so many more things than just school kits. That's one that I can make usually about 6. There's one that has a lot more supplies in it, and it goes into, I think it's about 5-gallon bucket, probably more for family. They're more family size, and they have soap and different supplies that people need. Yes, they go wherever they're needed. There are countries in Africa and in Central or Middle Asia. You don't have to be Christians to get them. And you just, if you have a need, Central MCC finds out about it and then responds to the need. And this goes on year round. In United States, Canada, and Europe. And I don't think the Europeans were involved in the last one that we had before the pandemic. We have a fun time, and we are completing something for people to keep warm. So
wonderful.
Those go throughout the world. And we think of some of the places over like in India and Africa and places like that. We think it's hot all the time. Well, some places they do have their cold season, and so they need something to keep warm.
Let me open it up to everybody else for a moment and see if folks have comments that you'd like to make on this topic of what can I do without, and also potentially comments to Mildred, questions for her, and maybe from a tradition that you've followed, you might have a different perspective or a just a different approach on what it means to do without. And while people are thinking of their comment or their question, why don't you go ahead, Mildred, tell us about some of the other things that the Mennonites do.
Okay, they have a canning project. It started in October this year, and they'll go to 31 locations. And they'll end up in Canada in April. And it's a mobile canner, and they have a crew of 4 young men who work with volunteers in these locations where they go. People donate meat. This year they're doing, I think, beef and at least beef and chicken. They're in charge of the canning, and they do it according to the standards of the Department of Agriculture, so it's safe. And Mennonites and Amish and often community people who just want to help will help with that project. The places where they have they do the canning, they can get 10% of the meat that they use in their care and share types of programs in their location. And so not everything goes overseas. It's available for people here in the United States too. And then we have MCC sales, and that's across the United States. I think they have them in Canada too. People donate items, and then they're auctioned, and the money goes to MCC. At the one that we have in Colorado, there's usually a tractor that somebody has bought, and some of them are like antique tractors that are redone. I mean, they replace whatever needs to be replaced. They paint them, they look like new. There are people who collect tractors too. So a lot of times they come and get their tractors, and sometimes cars are donated and in good condition, and those are sold. And sometimes there's furniture, and they're good items. They're not cheap or chintzy. And then the quilt auction is a big thing at the sales, and they're made by people who love the quilt. And there are wall hangings and quilts for beds and that kind of thing. That's another way of raising money. And then there are thrift stores in various areas that have nice items for sale, and they are sold at a reasonable price. It's not like going into a store and having to pay $10 for something. You may pay $2 for it. That's another way of raising money. And there are people in different countries who make items that that they make in their own countries, and they're paid better than a lot of other places, if they're just commercial.
Yeah, let me ask you one last question. Would you feel as if there's something about living a Christ-like life that is being aimed at here, with this idea of giving up of one's goods and one's time, one's efforts? Is that something maybe that's behind the inspiration of what the Mennonites and Amish do? Well,
Like this MCC that is in the name of Christ, that is on the boxes that items are packed in. If we depend on God for a lot of things. We believe that we do need to work and take care of our families. We help others in need and donate time. It's doing what God has told us to do. And there is a reward in that. Not financial. We're not taking away from somebody, we are giving to somebody.
Diana?
Mildred, I really want to thank you so much for your sharing. I actually didn't know anything about Mennonites, and what I hear is about trusting in God and listening and living simplicity and sharing with others. And I really want to thank you, because I didn't know that the Mennonites were a Christian community and that they listened to the Holy Spirit as a way of being guided. And especially in our society right now, my heart is really full to feel that kind of love and energy that you have for your fellow, for around the world, the people around the world, and that you really do live by faith. And especially in this world right now with so much technology and everything, how is it for the children? Is it more difficult right now to have? Are they very strict in keeping the children that they stay within their community, or how do they help the children follow this wonderful way of living?
In the Amish, the children they have a teacher. I don't think they really have a lot of training. I'm not sure about that, but the children go to school through the 8th grade, and the Amish do not really want their children to be going to high school or college.
Hmm.
And there are some who break away from the Amish in order to be able to do that. And their children, the teaching in their schools is consistent with what they live at home. The children, I think the children are being protected from what is undesirable in the world. My husband has a cousin who is married to, they're called Beachy Amish, and they're more progressive. They have radios, but it's more like for getting news and the weather and that kind of thing. And this family, the mother has homeschooled the children. They do have a parochial school in the area, but she has elected to teach the children. Some of the Amish have businesses like the wood working businesses, and they do have computers. I think they may have electricity in the buildings where they are making things, and telephones. Some of the old order Amish have telephones in a little building. They can't have phones in their house, but they can have phones in a little building. It's not very big. It's sort of like an outside toilet size, and they have the telephone out there, and they can talk to people on that phone. But mostly they are still pretty. They're leery of, if they have a cell phone, and some of the businesses have that. I think they're supposed to stay at the business and not be taken home because of what the kids could get into on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So they are protected.
How does your the Mennonites differ from Amish? Because in your congregation, do they go to do they have schools for them, and so they keep them separate, or how does that work for your congregation?
In our branch, we go to public school, we go to college. A lot of parents do limit what the kids have access to. And there are Christian schools where they have 12 grades, but they determine what they're going to be teaching. And they teach science and all that, but it's with a Christian view.
What a gift to our society to have that available. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Well, thank you. And I heard just recently that somewhere in Hawaii, there is a Mennonite church. You might keep your eyes and ears open.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Bob, can I ask you, from what you've heard today and maybe in the past about the Plain People traditions, what that might remind you of in terms of other traditions that you know about that are a little bit more circumspect about, or a little more reluctant to build up earthly treasures, worldly delights?
Yeah. I was struck at the very beginning when you were talking about Bible verses, referring to godliness and contentment. It seems to me that the operative word is being content and trusting. In other words, as it says in the Book of Solomon, trust the lilies of the field, don't overwork, but they trust, the trust of things being taken care of without so much worry and that. And I think there's really an interesting American aspect to this. When de Tocqueville came to America from Europe, he found something in America that he didn't see in Europe. And he called it these voluntary organizations. Sometimes they were Christian and they would create kits and things that were described earlier. Sometimes there were entire communities that were taking care of themselves by and large. And then some of them were civic organizations, Rotaries, Lions clubs, Elks clubs. And I know that they do things very similar. They will look at disaster areas like floods and earthquakes, and they'll send emergency kits. And it'll have like emergency medicines, a tent, water. They've listed maybe 5 or 6 things that go into this kit that can be sent to a community or family, and they could then have shelter, food, water, and that sort of thing. And when de Tocqueville looked at America, he said, there are thousands of these. He called them 1,000 points of light. And the first president, Herbert Walker Bush, referred to that, and he says, let's keep going with that. Government doesn't have to solve every problem. It's simpler to let communities sort of help themselves and help each other. And that's been, I think, an American value. Thoreau talks about in economy that small is beautiful on the one hand, and at one point, when a very powerful phrase, he says, simplify, simplify, simplify. What can you do to simplify? And, he went off to the woods, he said, to live deliberately, but even then, he knew he had to do something. In his case, he farmed beans to get some money because he couldn't get sugar, he couldn't get coffee, and he wanted those things. And so, he complicated his world, and yet he always had in mind, how can I live more simply? So it was an interesting set of questions. And I think there's something about American democracy that also feeds that sense. I mean, I know we're very politically divided right now, but the energy is still there to take care of each other, and 1,000 points of light. And I don't know if we can ever get back to that, but it's an element of trust. We don't trust each other right now. But so that was my first reaction. The other thing I would mention in terms of Buddhism is the Bodhisattva ideal. Kuan Yin is the Bodhisattva that hears the cries of the world and tries to help them. She has 1,000 arms and 1,000 eyes to see the suffering of the world and to use her hands to help that. So I think that's a very similar ideal as in the Mennonites and such. And it's interesting, the Mennonites, I'm more familiar with the Shakers, but they started small businesses. They were the first company in America to put seeds in packages. Very labor intensive, very pure. And also, there's nothing less harmful than selling seeds. And so, it was a great thing. They actually the only ones doing it. So they actually did economically very well, and they could use that to share with other people and to get things for themselves. But selling seed packets was an interesting way to think of something you could do communally that wouldn't negatively impact the world. And it was pretty simple. For many years, all the seeds that came to you as a farmer, you bought some flower seeds, some zinnias or whatever you bought, they would come from the Shakers. That's who did the seeds. So those are just some thoughts.
Thank you. I didn't know that.
And I have a question. Who are the Shakers?
Well, the Shakers would be a very similar type of group. They have many of the same values. They're basically Christian. They come together and they do isolate. They don't mix with others. They don't have, they have horse-driven carriages. They're famous for making very simple pieces of wood, chairs and tables, and then hanging the chairs on the walls so that you have that open space. So they have a lot of values of simplicity, but they are a similar group to the Mennonites and the Amish. The Shakers are, I think there are 4 or 5 very large groups in America that did that same kind of experiment, and many of the same community values in terms of keeping away from people and protecting your children. So it's interesting that one of the first constitutional freedom of religion, freedom of education acts in the Supreme Court was to say that the Mennonites, I think in the Midwest somewhere, had the right to not send their kids to school, but to educate themselves, that they had that right constitutionally.
In my studies to understand a little bit more about who the plain people are. And I did read a bit about Shakers. Shakers actually believe in complete chastity. So they don't marry, and if they have children, they are adopted. Children who need families, need homes, would be adopted by Shakers. So it's not a very fast growing group. In fact, it's very, very small. The group that I read about was on its last 2 or 3 members, still sending out newsletters. But if you've ever heard that beautiful song, "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we are in our place just right, we will be in the valley of love and delight." Well, that's a Shaker song. And so making music was something that evidently the Shakers did too.
Well, America had an experience of actually creating what they called ideal communities, utopias. And there were a number of them around, and Thoreau almost joined one, but then he just didn't want to give up that much freedom, because they did have rules. And chastity, for example, for the Shakers was a very much, and what they really did also was segregate the men from the women, so that, again, women would work together in all of the womanly work, and men would work together in all of the manly work. So it was a very divided thing, and there wasn't a lot of individual freedom. That was not their ideal. Their ideal was communal freedom. So these ideal communities, some of them, they come up back again in the 60s with the utopian flower children and things, but that energy is very American. Many groups were created, and some of them held on and really flourished. And the Shakers have held on, although they were more common in the 19th century than the 20th century.
I just checked there. There are 2 Mennonite groups and churches in Honolulu, Pearl City, and someplace else. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Mary, do you have any comments or questions coming both from the Catholic Christian tradition and or from the Hawaiian tradition? Any of this ring bells?
Very much so. Thank you. Thank you, Mildred. I came late, so I was not able to hear the beginning of your presentation, but listening to comments and I was actually looking for something that had to do with joy is being satisfied with what you have. And we don't need a lot of stuff. And I think as I'm going through this transition period of my life where my husband has died, and I've got all this, I'm living in the house that my mother lived in for all her life. And there is so much stuff here, and I don't need it, but I don't want to just throw it away. And talking about organizations that help, they take donations and they share. My parish of Mary Star of the Sea here in Kahala, they do have the youth groups, the kids that are in Sunday school. They have projects where they help hygiene kits. So that is something that we are active in providing. It usually ends up being around the time of the holidays when they ask for donations and stuff, but it's an ongoing thing. And I know that I don't know where I read it. I've been reading a lot of devotionals. I've been reading the Bible in a year with Father Michael Schmitz, and the fact that Jesus said, feed people, because they're not going to listen to you if they've got a hungry stomach that's louder than what you're trying to tell them. So it is so true that we must share what we have, and our actions speak louder than words. Amen.
There's some of these same values of hard work, of making do if you don't have, rather than, for example, going out on an extended credit. This is one of the first things that Mildred mentioned to me, is that as a Mennonite, you do your very best to stay out of going into debt. And also for using what you do have for helping others. And I was wondering, and this could be for anybody here in the group, have you ever felt that you really missed out on something important by just making do with what you had at the time? Or did you actually gain something even more important?
I'd like to take a shot at that one. My life was guided by a desire to help others. So that's the path I took in my career. And I had a 30-year career as in the U.S. Public Health Service, where we awarded grants of money to nonprofit agencies for outpatient clinics. And that was a career that ended with my retirement in 1994. So I've always felt the need to do some type of service work. And I've been a member of the YMCA, which is started as a Christian organization for the last would be about 75 years, and has served on committees and boards and fundraising efforts, and that was outside of my employment. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's very inspiring. And I know that you've donated very, very generously to a lot of different worthy causes. So what about you, Mildred? Have you ever missed out on something by making do?
Not really. I was thinking about your question of, if you don't have something that you need and you're making do, you have to use your mind and guidance from God sometimes too, to see what you can do in place of, so that you're not spending a lot of money. And I think it helps us depend on God more too. I think it's if we can do it without feeling bad about it, I think it's and growing up, we didn't. It wasn't, things weren't that much that didn't have that much importance to it. My father made do, and this was during the Depression. He farmed for my grandparents, but he made what we called a hoopy tractor. He took a 1924 and a 1926 that he stripped down. He took the all the roof and all that kind of stuff off of it, and he put an engine in it that would be able to pull things. And he used that as a tractor. And I had fun with that because I like to be out with my father and my older brother who helped with the farming. And so then there was a time when they needed to take in hay. But anyhow, he would set the speed. And I would drive the hoopy tractor. It was safe. 4 wheels were apart. Front wheels were apart. They weren't together, like in some of the tractors that you got from the cap of the radiator was supposed to be from where I was sitting. That was supposed to be. I followed that line, and then the hay, the thing that took the hay up from the ground in onto the wagon, that was in line with the row. That was a lot of fun for me. And so you know, you take, if you need something and you that was one way that my father made something that could be used in place of the more expensive tractors. You know, I don't remember feeling bad about having to make do, and that just carried on. You know, that's just what you did as I grew up and got married, and there were times when things were hard, and so we would figure out what we could do in place of.
Yes.
And that's something, some people don't have those imaginations because they've never had to do it.
So that is something to be gained.
Yes.
It's not only that self-sufficiency, but also that greater imagination and creativity that you cultivated. So is there somebody who would like to give Mildred a vote of thanks today?
Well, I certainly would offer that, and just wonderful to see you in person, Mildred, and I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you. And it was good seeing you too.
Thanks.
Mildred, thank you so much for giving us a little slice of a life that's so foreign and outside of our reality here. I'm guessing you won't be shopping on Black Friday after Thanksgiving, or doing retail therapy. But thank you so much for sharing your life and your values with us. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have shopped on Black Friday already, and it's a pain.
I just want to say, what a delight to have your dad and your aunt here. And what a gift to have their wisdom and their sharing. And I just have chicken skin, and I'm really grateful that you came and shared with us and told your stories and shared your tradition. It's such a gift. So thank you very much.